Let's bring John into the conversation. 97.3 ESPN.com. Eagles and NFL Insider John McMullen. He'll be live tomorrow from Lincoln Financial Field. Pete and I will be live at the Wonder Bar in Atlantic City. Countdown to kickoff coverage starts at 2. John McMullen here on 97.3 ESPN. John, I'm not sure what more can be said to add to the coverage of this game, but we will do our best to find something that hasn't really been pulled out there. But one thing for sure that I think is intriguing is that the people down in Atlanta, when I was talking to the people in Atlanta today, the name that they gave me, they said inside the locker room, the name that keeps coming up is Jay Ajayi. They believe that the Eagles are going to try to use Jay Ajayi tomorrow.
Yeah, so do I. We talked a little bit about that. That's because in the Falcons, they've already seen it. And he ran for 130 yards, which was the best performance by a running back against the Falcons this season, back in, I think it was week 6. So, and they, remember, the Dolphins don't exactly throw the ball. So if you look at that game on film, they were trying to stop Jay. They had a lot of 8-man fronts, and they still couldn't do it. So I'm not surprised that he's one of the bigger concerns, especially when you talk about how Nick Foles has played late in the season. I mean, I think everyone assumes the Eagles have to run the ball, and it's time to go to Jay Ajayi at the top of that running back by committee.
One thing, this is a Falcons team that we kind of talked about, 17 points a game the last 7 weeks. It's the best in the NFL. But last week they gave up yards on the ground, and then the Rams kind of got away from it. That game was I don't think McVay had his best day out there. But if Philadelphia consistently just goes to the ground game like that, they can wear down this Falcons team because, as we kind of hinted at, they're a smaller team. Even though they've only given up 17 points a game, they've been pretty good. They are smaller. It's a smallish team that can get worn down against the run game.
Yeah, especially the middle linebacker. I mean, Deion Jones is 222 pounds. So both Jay Ajayi and LeGarrette Blount are bigger than the middle linebacker on the opposing team. And that's, the Falcons aren't rare. That's the way the NFL's going because it's more of a passing league, and you need your 3-down linebackers to be able to do things in pass coverage. So that's why you see some of these undersized linebackers. But then all of a sudden, that looks great in September, October. Then the weather turns. You're in January. You're in the playoffs, and you go, oh, we're going to have to run the ball, and we got a 222-pound middle linebacker. So that's kind of the dichotomy of today's NFL is the fact that everybody wants to build to stop spread offenses, and then the league kind of changes overnight. Once you get into the playoffs, especially in the Northeast, and if you have to play, or the Midwest for that matter, but if you have to play in places like Philadelphia and New England and Pittsburgh, you're going to have to run the ball in January. You don't necessarily have to do that back in September and October.
Hey, John, Foles failed to complete a pass thrown at least 20 yards downfield once he took over as the starter, but doesn't he have to take his shot? I mean, everybody's talking run, but don't you have to take a shot?
Well, yeah. I mean, at some point, you have to do what the defense is giving you. Now, it's interesting because Atlanta could get out of its comfort zone. If they get into this mentality of we know the quarterback can't hurt us, and they come out of their typical cover 3 shell and start playing a lot of single high safety to put 8 in the box to stop the running game, they're not used to playing that way a lot. They do it occasionally. Everybody mixes coverage, but their DNA as a defense is cover 3. So if you get away from that, in a weird way, that might hurt you, and Nick should have some chances to throw the football down the field. Problem is there's going to be winds gusting from 25 to 30, and we've all seen how he's performed late in the season in bad weather. It looked the entire 2 weeks like it was going to be fine. It was going to be fine. It looked good. And then, boom, last 24, 48 hours, it changes. It's going to be really cold and really windy. So I don't think that bodes well for the passing game. And certainly I'll say this, if they are in that cover 3 shell and Nick tries to fit that ball in there, that's not going to work out well.
John McMullen with us. John, I found a list that was most attempts without a completion of 20-plus yards downfield in the final 3 weeks, and Nick Foles way on top of that list with 8. You had other names on there like Brian Hoyer 1, Joe Callahan 1, Tariq Cohen was on the list 1. I mean, this is not a great group to be associated with, and who needs then to be his guy in the passing game if he wants to get off this dubious list?
Well, I think that they're going to have success. And by success, I'm not talking about 300 yards or anything of that nature, but just converting a couple key third downs, which has been an issue. I mean, they're 1 of 17. I wrote about this on 973ESPN.com today. If you look at, I mentioned the Vikings are the best team on third down defense in the NFL, and they give up 25% of third downs. The Eagles, since Carson Wentz got hurt, are converting at a 22% rate. That is beyond awful. Because when I quote that Vikings number, understand that is the best rate of any defense over the past quarter century. And the Eagles are worse than that since Carson Wentz has come out. That has to change. And I'm not talking about 45%. When Carson was in, that was the Eagles' rate of converting third downs. But they have to be at least manageable. They have to be at 30%, 33%. Not great, just not historically bad.
The Falcons made it to the Super Bowl last year, John, based on a dynamic offense, which was first in the NFL. This season, though, are they riding their defense? When you look at the Atlanta Falcons, are they a defensive-minded team? Their coach is a defensive guy.
Yeah, he is. He comes from Seattle. He was the defensive coordinator. They are gearing more towards that way. And it's clear offensively they tried to run the football more. They tried to become more balanced after what happened in the Super Bowl in the big collapse. But you look at the superstars of this team, they're still on the offensive side of the football. It starts with Matt Ryan and Julio Jones, but they have improved a lot defensively. But when you look at the Falcons, it's very hard to look at Matt Ryan and Julio Jones and Freeman and Coleman and Sanu and say they can't hurt you offensively. But it's been that way this year. They have not been dynamic offensively.
Hey, John, the Falcons had last year, one of their big problems was a lot of young guys on defense. The most rookies in the NFL on the defensive side of the ball, 3,071 snaps from rookies last year on defense. This year, just 748. They had 10 defenders make at least 14 starts this year. So there's a lot of continuity on that defense. They know it a lot better. But who is the standout guy of that group? They're young and they're fast, but who would you say is the standout guy? If Atlanta has to game plan for Fletcher Cox potentially, who's the guy the Eagles have to get ready for and gear up for?
Well, I think it's Vic Beasley. He hasn't had a great year, certainly when you compare it to last season when he had, I think, 15.5 sacks. He hasn't been that guy, but he is the guy who can take over the game as far as the pass rush goes. So he's still the one I think you have to start with and go down from there. But they have a ton of talent, especially in the back seven. I talked about maybe some of the bad parts of Deion Jones' game, but there's a lot of good parts in the fact that he's a sideline-to-sideline player. He's one of the fastest linebackers in the NFL. He's a true three-down linebacker. And then their secondary is tremendously talented. They have two good cornerbacks in Trufant and Alford. They have a great in-the-box safety in Neal. They can do a lot of things, and you can see the comparisons to the Legion of Boom. You can see what Dan Quinn is trying to do in trying to build in Atlanta, and it's certainly heading in the right direction. They've been great in the second half of the season. They're tremendously athletic on the back seven, just like Seattle. What they haven't gotten outside of Beasley is that play up front. They do have two talented and two very big defensive tackles in Grady Jarrett and Dontari Poe. And those guys are key in the game as well because they have to keep the Eagles' offensive line off of Jones so he can flow and make plays when in run support. That might be the biggest matchup in this entire game.
I'm glad you brought up that name, John, because as far as Vic Beasley goes, 46% last season of the Falcons sacks. That was the highest percentage in the NFL, and no Falcons player accounted for more than 24% of the team's sacks this season. So, of course, Vic Beasley a factor. But as far as Dontari Poe goes, they added him in the offseason to shore up that rush defense, and now they've had 8 fewer rushing touchdowns between the tackles this season. So who matches up with Dontari Poe on the Eagles' offensive line?
Well, that's going to be mainly Jason Kelsey's job, and Jason's been a first-team All-Pro. Generally, they play sort of the 4-3 under look, so one of their defensive tackles is on the nose, and the other plays 3 technique generally. But you look at Jason Kelsey in the year he's had, Pro Football Focus rated him the number one. Forget about number one center, the number one offensive lineman in the entire National Football League. That's how well Jason Kelsey has played. So when I look at this game, I think that's sort of, we talked about the Falcons and mentioning Jay Ajayi. I think where the Falcons have an issue is matching up with the Eagles front on both sides. Now, obviously, offensively, the Eagles have a weakness with Vaitai and Wisniewski, so you have to take advantage of that if you're the Atlanta Falcons. But I like Jason Kelsey against either defensive tackle. He's dominated all season.
I guess one question will be, who's matched up in the problem for Vaitai? I mean, we know that he has kind of been iffy down the stretch here. How much of a factor is the matchup with Vaitai?
Well, big. I mean, if you look at Adrian Claiborne, he had that 6-sack game. So you don't think about him as being a dominant weak side pass rusher. He's been around for a long time, but it tells you when he's got a good matchup, he can deliver. But as a whole, I think that's part of this game that the Eagles have a significant advantage because I don't think the Falcons front on either side, their offensive line against the Eagles' defensive line and vice versa, I think those are big advantages for Philadelphia.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, with all of the Eagles coverage for Eagles and Falcons to get you ready for the matchup. Weather, you say, you write at 97.3 ESPN.com, weather will be a factor. And I know that you are not a meteorologist, but they don't get it right often either. So what are the Eagles thinking about the weather tomorrow? Because, I was asked about the weather. It's funny because nationally, I did a Dallas radio this morning, and they asked me about the weather. I said, well, right now I'm looking at fog. I had snow the other day. They're telling me it's supposed to be 50 or 60. Now they're saying it's supposed to drop. So when you're trying to game plan, how much does the weather factor in what you're going to kind of do?
Well, Doug talked about that earlier in the week, and he said it doesn't really factor in, Frank Reich as well for that matter, it doesn't really factor in unless it's going to be extreme, as it was against the Oakland Raiders and the Dallas Cowboys in the regular season. As I mentioned with Pete earlier, all this entire 2-week period, those long-range forecasts look good. And then at the very last moment, cold front's coming through. It's going to drop, as you mentioned, at 65 today. By the time the game starts, the wind chills are going to be in the 20s. By the time you're in the guts of the game, the wind chills are going to be in the teens again with 25-mile-an-hour gusts. That's not good for Nick Foles, but it's not good for Matt Ryan either. So that's the way you have to look at it from an Eagles standpoint. This is a dome team coming into a difficult weather environment. I think everything, I've said it all week, is trending towards a low-scoring game, and I think this just makes it more likely because neither team is going to be able to chuck the football around. It's not going to be that kind of afternoon.
So, John, after Mike and I do the pregame show tomorrow, I'm going to jet up to the link. I'll be there as a fan. How many layers do I need tomorrow? 2, 3, 4?
Quite a few. You need as many layers as you can get because you got wind chills. Yeah, Mike's right. The meteorologists, they don't typically I don't want to criticize them, but, when it's a week out, they can make a lot of mistakes. When it's 24 hours away, they're not going to make a lot of mistakes. And at about 6:30, when you're in the guts of that game, the wind chills are going to be in the teens. So layer up, people.
Sports Pass Live, 97.3 ESPN. A weird dynamic for the game. Saturday, 4:30. It's kind of an odd time for both the teams. You're not used to playing a Saturday game to begin with, and it's like a 4:30 game, which, these East Coast teams don't play that 4 o'clock game all that often. They're typically 1 o'clock. Regardless, they might play at 4, but that's because it's 1 o'clock where they actually are. So even though they're playing at 4 on our side, so this is not a routine for the Eagles and the Falcons. And the Falcons, John, they've done a lot of travel. They've played, their bye week was week 5. They traveled to L.A. They probably red-eyed at home. There's a lot to do to get prepared for the game. And then to kind of be knocked out of their routine, you wonder what kind of, we talked yesterday during our injury report with Dr. Kevin McHale, who was a assistant trainer with the New England Patriots. And he said by this time, man, these guys' bodies are just so beat up. That we kind of understand. But he said, no, it's real. These guys are beat up in the playoffs. But the travel that these guys go through, too, he said that doesn't get taken into account a lot, the travel that these guys and the toll that takes on their body.
No, it's big. I mean, that's one of the major reasons getting a bye in the playoffs. Everyone fights so hard for it. This is the reason why. The Eagles are well rested. And you can argue, we always have these arguments about rest versus rust in these types of situations, but you always, always, always want to have that week off. And it's because guys are beat up this time of year, but it's for that reason as well. I mean, if you're Atlanta, it's one thing for New Orleans, who at least had a home game, and now they got to go on the road. That's difficult enough. The fact Atlanta had to go out to Los Angeles, as you mentioned, come back. Now they got to go to Philly. That is difficult, and you got to prepare and get ready in between. And that's one of the reasons the Eagles have a significant home field advantage in this situation.
Better in a few minutes with John McMullen talking Falcons and Eagles. So Mike Breen, John's been saying that Fletcher Cox needs to earn his big paycheck and that he has a clear advantage off over Ben Garland, right? And you talked about Ben Garland, and Mike and I have talked about him getting whipped last week against Aaron Donald. Is that a matchup right there that Fletcher Cox needs to earn his paycheck and win?
Yeah, there's no question. I'm not in the camp that says Fletcher hasn't earned his big I mean, he's been a phenomenal player, and he continues to be ever since he signed that. And if you're looking at the best interior defensive lineman in this league, the conversation starts with Aaron Donald. He's by himself. But for people not named Aaron Donald, Fletcher's in that conversation as being the best defensive tackle in this league. So, yeah, I mean, that's one of the weaknesses of the Falcons, their entire the interior of their offensive line. Even Alex Mack has had a bad year. So typically a strength has turned into a weakness. And you saw it against the Rams. Matt Ryan was just under duress, a lot of it because of Aaron Donald just beating them like a drum. But then again, they won the football game, and they won it pretty easily. And that kind of tells you who Matt Ryan is, because you don't think about him as being a very mobile quarterback. But what he is he's got a lot of Tom Brady traits. He slides in the pocket. He understands how to play this game. It might be a step left, a step right. It might be climbing the pocket. It might be sliding over. He has the ability to do those types of things, and he can make up for that bad interior of the offensive line. But I do expect Fletcher Cox to dominate his job, and his job right in front of him is to take advantage of the interior of the Atlanta offensive line.
Now, John, a lot of the success for the Eagles on the defensive line has become as a result of them being able to rotate the guys in and kind of go 8 deep. Do you see them continuing that pattern? Do you see this is a playoff game and the stakes are higher, that they're maybe going to lean on the starters a little bit more?
No question. It's like an NBA game when you shorten your rotations in the playoffs. Yeah, I mean, and Fletcher talked about this. Really, if you look at the end of the regular season games, he had started to play more. And he said, look, if I have to be on the field, if it's a key situation in a tight game, he's going to be on the field. Maybe earlier in the season, they would have rotated in to save him for this type of situation. But I expect Fletcher Cox to be out there 90% of the time. That's just the way it is. Brandon Graham, same thing. Now, with the other guys, there's certain rotations where Chris Long's obviously going to be in. That's how the Eagles go in the NASCAR package. They bring Chris Long to rush from the left end. Brandon goes inside. And you'll see Derek Barnett continue to rotate with Vinny Curry on the right side. But as far as Bo Allen and Destiny Vallejo, if Tim Jernigan's healthy, if Fletcher's healthy, they're going to play a heck of a lot.
By the way, the Atlantic City Office of Emergency Management has issued a code blue beginning at 8 o'clock Saturday through 8 o'clock Monday due to the wind chill temperature that will be near 0.
Ew.
So by the end of that game, we'll be right around 7 o'clock, 7:30. You're going to be approaching wind chills of about 0. So have fun with that at that game, Pete Thompson.
I will.
Well, I think it's going to be a little bit better. Obviously, there's much more wind in Atlantic City. I think the numbers I'm seeing up here are 11, but that's not
11 feels nice.
Still not, that's still not good. And we've all seen again the negative part is the glass is half empty part is Nick did not play well in that kind of weather. Glass is half full is that Dak Prescott didn't play well in that weather. Derek Carr didn't play well in that weather. And Matt Ryan plays in a dome, and now he's got to try to deal with 11-degree wind chills. It's going to be difficult.
Johnny Mac, let's get your picks for divisional weekend here. Tom Brady 6-1 his career against the Titans, including a win in the 2003 divisional. New England, Tennessee, who you like?
Well, the only question to me is how much does New England win by? I would think it's at least 3 touchdowns. This is as easy as an NFL playoff game. You get the pick. The Titans are just not ready to be in the spot. Bill Belichick is going to just say, Marcus Mariota is not going to beat me running the football. He's going to have to throw it, and it's just not going to happen, especially in New England.
Jags-Steelers. Jags beat the Steelers 30-9 in Week 5. Pittsburgh's worst home loss in the Tomlin era since 2007. So, Jags-Steelers, who you got?
Well, I think it's going to be a better game than probably most people suspect because of that Jacksonville defense. But it is a revenge game for Pittsburgh. I can't imagine they would lose twice on their home field to a team that's rising but is not ready. Similar situation. Quarterback's just not ready for this situation. So Pittsburgh wins the game, but I think it's going to be tougher for them than most people think.
Saints-Vikings played on Monday night. Sam Bradford was the quarterback. Adrian Peterson led the Saints in rushing. He's no longer there. Bradford's out. Dalvin Cook had a game-high 127 yards. He gone as well. So, Saints-Vikings Part 2. Who wins that one?
All chalk. And by the way, can you imagine the New Orleans Saints had Mark Ingram and Kamara, and they played Adrian Peterson in Week 1? It's amazing. But, that Vikings defense is just too good. And that's if it's not the loudest place in the NFL, it's right there with Seattle and Kansas City. I think that will create some problems for a high-powered New Orleans offense. I think the Vikings win that game pretty easily.
All right, John, Eagles and Falcons, your pick for that game. And don't forget, pick the perfect score tonight, $1,000 at 5:30, an hour from now. John, give the fans some help.
Yeah, I've been going back and forth all week on who to pick in this game, and I hate to go chalk on all 4 games, but I'm going chalk. I'm picking the Eagles to win by a field goal and win the game 20-17. I think the weather's going to be very helpful. I think the fact that the road, as you mentioned, Mike, Atlanta have to go into Los Angeles, then come in here in back-to-back weeks. I think that's going to hurt them. And it's going to be a 1-score game in the fourth quarter. So anything can happen, but I think the Eagles are going to find a way.
Well, then that wouldn't be chalk. That'd be an upset.
Well, that's true. I meant chalk as far as the home team goes.
There you go.
Sorry.
All right.
I should have. I hate to pick. I always look for at least one road team to win. I just don't see it happening this week.
All right, Johnny Mac will be live tomorrow at Lincoln Financial Field as the Eagles get ready for the Falcons. I'm sure we'll be tapping into John from Lincoln Financial Field for the pregame tomorrow just to kind of set the scene for us as we will be kind of sitting in his pregame spot for the countdown to kickoff tomorrow. We'll be at the Wonder Bar. John will be in Philly. Joe Kraus, Pete Thompson, and I will be taking you till Merrill and Mike have the call at 4:30. All right, John. We'll catch up with you tomorrow, pal.
All right. Thanks, guys.